The courthouse in a quiet Midwestern town had never been this full. Normally, the oak-paneled room saw minor cases, traffic tickets, property disputes, the occasional civil trial. But today, there were no empty seats. Every bench was filled with neighbors, police officers, school teachers, and reporters from 3 different counties all crowding in. The air smelled faintly of old paper, polished wood, and nervous sweat. At the front of the room, chained too, a short lead beside his handler, sat Rex. He was a German shepherd, massive and powerful, with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to scan every corner of the room. His ears flicked at the sound of whispers, his body tense, but he didn't bark. He just sat there, obedient and proud, wearing the same calm alertness he always did on patrol. To anyone who knew him, Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, a guardian. But today, Rex was on trial. His handler, Officer Daniels, sat beside him in full uniform, trying desperately to hide the storm raging inside. He had served with Rex for nearly 6 years, through countless arrests, drug busts, and dangerous encounters. To Daniels, Rex wasn't just a partner. He was family. And yet, because of one violent night, everything they had built together now stood in jeopardy. The case was simple in the judge's eyes. A month earlier, Daniels and Rex had been dispatched to a domestic disturbance call. A man, later identified as Marcus Lyle, had been threatening his neighbors with a knife. When officers surrounded him, Marcus lunged. Daniels shouted a single command, and Rex launched forward, knocking the weapon to the ground and bringing the suspect down hard. No officers were injured, no lives lost. The arrest should have been routine. But Marcus's lawyer claimed otherwise. He painted Rex not as a hero, but as an out-of-control animal that used excessive force. Photographs of Marcus's bite wounds were splashed across newspapers. Civil rights activists, always eager for a cause, had amplified the case, demanding justice. By the time it reached the courtroom, the matter wasn't about one arrest. It had become a public spectacle. Daniels shifted uncomfortably as the judge entered. The man wore the heavy black robe like armor, his sharp features stern and unreadable. He adjusted his glasses and struck the gavel once, silencing the crowd. This court will now hear final arguments in the matter of Rex, a canine employed by the city police department. The prosecutor rose immediately. He was a polished man, his suit immaculate, his words sharp. He spoke about liability and danger to the public. He called Rex a weapon without conscience, and argued that the dog posed an ongoing threat. If this animal is allowed to remain in service, he declared dramatically, the next citizen attacked may not survive. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Some nodded along. Others scowled. Then it was Daniel's turn. His voice shook at first, but grew steadier as he spoke. Rex did what he was trained to do, what he has always done, protect. At night, he saved lives. Without him, officers could have died. Civilians could have been hurt. He acted on my command, not out of malice. He is not a weapon. He is a partner. He is a hero. Daniels turned, looking at the crowd. Many of you know Rex. He's visited your schools. He's been at your community events. He's played with your children. He's walked these streets, not as a threat, but as a guardian. He has given everything to this city. A little boy in the back row tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Why are they hurting Rex?" The mother pulled him close, but the words lingered, heavy in the air. The judge listened silently, his expression unreadable. He tapped his pen against his desk, then leaned forward. His voice carried no emotion, no hesitation. The law is not swayed by sentiment, he began. This court finds that the canine in question presents a risk to public safety. Therefore, Rex is to be removed from service and euthanized. For a moment, the room didn't react. The word seemed too heavy, too final, to register. Then came the gasp's sharp, painful sounds echoing against the wood-paneled walls. A woman in the gallery clapped her hands over her mouth. An officer muttered a curse under his breath. Daniels felt his heart collapse in his chest. He turned. Slowly, his hand tightening on Rex's collar. The dog looked up at him, ears perked, eyes trusting. Rex didn't understand. To him, this was just another long day with his handler, another room full of strangers. He had no idea that the people in this room had just signed his death sentence. Daniels fought back tears, forcing himself to stay composed. He had seen men cry at funerals, mothers weep in hospital waiting rooms, but this felt worse. How could he explain to Rex, his loyal partner, that the very city he had protected had turned its back on him? Reporters scribbled furiously, already forming tomorrow's headlines. Hero dog condemned. Judge orders K9 euthanized. Justice or injustice? Children cried quietly in the back row. Officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some openly glaring at the judge. A sense of betrayal was thick, suffocating. Daniels bent down, pressing his forehead against Rex's. "I'm so sorry, boy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I tried." The gavel struck again, sealing the verdict. The courtroom was dismissed. People stood, muttering, shaking their heads, filing out into the hallway. But Daniels didn't move. He sat frozen, one hand buried in Rex's fur, his other clenched tightly into a fist. He had faced dangerous suspects before. He had stared down men with guns, survived nights where his life balanced on a razor's edge. But nothing had ever felt as hopeless as this. Rex shifted, laying his head in Daniels' lap, as if sensing his pain. Daniels closed his eyes, holding on to the only thing that mattered. He refused to let go. And then, just as the courtroom began to empty, the heavy wooden doors creaked open. Every head turned. The sound of the courtroom doors opening seemed louder than it should have been, an echo that cut through the hushed whispers and muffled sobs like a crack of thunder. Heads turned instinctively, some out of curiosity, others out of desperation, hoping that maybe, somehow, a miracle had just walked in. For Officer Daniels, seated in his chair with Rex's head still heavy on his lap, the sound snapped him out of his fog. He turned, his bloodshot eyes narrowing as he tried to see who had entered. All he could make out at first was a silhouette framed in the doorway, tall and broad against the light spilling from the hallway behind. The murmurs began almost immediately. "Who's that?" someone whispered from the gallery. "Looks like military," another voice muttered. "Why would he be here?" The man stepped forward, boots striking the marble floor with a rhythmic, almost deliberate sound. His uniform was crisp, but worn with the kind of authenticity that only comes from use in places far harsher than this tidy courthouse. His shoulders were squared, posture rigid, eyes scanning the room with the calm confidence of someone who had walked into danger before and survived it. It took only a moment for people to notice the insignia on his chest, a Navy SEAL. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the bailiff's hand froze mid-motion as he reached to shuffle papers on his desk. Navy SEALs weren't just soldiers. They were legends. To see one step into a rural courtroom was as surreal as seeing a celebrity. Except this man didn't carry fame. He carried a presence that silenced people without a word. The judge, visibly irritated at the disruption, cleared his throat. "This court has already reached a decision. Whoever you are, sir, this proceeding is concluded." The man didn't stop. His boots echoed until he stood at the front of the courtroom, just a few feet from where Daniels sat with Rex. He glanced down at the dog, and for a fleeting second, his hardened face softened. Rex's ears twitched, tail giving a faint thump. against the floor. "Your Honor," the man began, his voice steady, deep, and commanding. "With all due respect, you can't condemn this K9 without hearing the truth first." Daniel's head jerked up. His mind raced. Who was this stranger? How did he even know about Rex's case? The judge leaned forward, scowling. "State your name and reason for barging into my courtroom." The man stood tall, shoulders squared, as if he were addressing a superior officer. "Lieutenant Mark Callahan, United States Navy SEAL, recently returned from deployment overseas. I'm here because I know what dogs like Rex mean not just to officers, not just to soldiers, but to everyone who's ever had their life saved by one." The gallery erupted in hushed whispers. Some people exchanged wide-eyed glances, others leaned forward on the edges of their seats. Daniels felt his breath catch in his throat. He had heard of Callahan before, a decorated SEAL, known among military and law enforcement circles for his heroism. But what was he doing here, in this courtroom, fighting for a dog he had never worked with? The judge raised a hand, trying to silence the murmurs. "Lieutenant Callahan, this is a civilian courtroom. Your military service, while commendable, does not grant you authority here." "I'm not here to claim authority," Callahan replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here to speak truth. You're condemning a warrior without knowing the battlefield he fought on. That's not justice. That's blindness." The judge stiffened at the challenge. "This court operates on law, not sentiment or dramatic speeches." "Then consider this law," Callahan countered, reaching into the folder he carried under his arm. He set it firmly on the evidence table, the papers inside neatly bound and marked. "These are mission logs, classified until recently. They prove that K9 units aren't just animals. They're officially recognized as soldiers in combat. They receive ranks. They earn medals. They save lives every single day in conditions worse than anything faced on these streets. And yet, here at home, you're ready to treat one as disposable?" A hush fell over the room. Even the prosecutor, who had spent the entire morning arguing passionately against Rex, faltered. He shifted in his seat, clearly blindsided by this unexpected intrusion. Daniel's chest swelled with a cautious hope. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't alone in fighting for Rex's life. Someone with undeniable credibility, someone untouchable, was standing in front of the judge, saying the words Daniels had been dying to shout himself. The gallery leaned in, hungry for more. Callahan turned to face them, his voice carrying through the courtroom like a steady drumbeat. "I've been on missions where we had seconds to decide if we lived or died. And it wasn't always a man who saved us. Sometimes it was a dog. A dog who smelled the explosives we didn't see. A dog who charged into gunfire so his handler could live. A dog who stood between us and death, without hesitation, without fear. That's what Rex did for you. He isn't dangerous. He's a hero." The little boy from the back row, the one who had whispered to his mother earlier, tugged her sleeve again and pointed. "See, Mom? He's telling the truth." The mother's eyes brimmed with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. The judge's fingers tapped irritably on the desk. His expression betrayed a flicker of doubt, but he forced his tone to remain cold. "Lieutenant Callahan, you speak with conviction. But this is a matter of law, not war. In war, soldiers face combatants. In our streets, civilians deserve protection." Callahan didn't flinch, and Rex provided that protection. The suspect he stopped was armed with a knife. Do you think a taser would have guaranteed safety? Do you think an officer's bullet wouldn't have ended worse? Rex saved not only the officers, but the suspect himself. Because of him, no one died that night. That's not excessive force. That's restraint. A murmur of agreement spread through the gallery. Even a few of the jurors, who technically had no say in this kind of hearing, shifted uncomfortably. The weight of Callahan's words was undeniable. Daniel sat frozen, torn between gratitude and awe. He studied the seal's face, wondering what had driven him here. Did he know someone in the department? Had he heard the case on the news and felt compelled to intervene? All Daniels knew for certain was this: Callahan wasn't speaking from obligation. He was speaking from belief. Rex lifted his head, watching Callahan intently. His tail wagged. Once, then twice, as if he recognized something familiar in the man's tone, the calm authority of someone who had given orders to dogs like him before. The judge rubbed his temple, visibly frustrated. This interruption is highly irregular. If you wish to file testimony, it must be done formally through counsel. I'll file it however you want, Callahan said evenly, but you will. Hear me now, because this isn't about protocol. It's about justice. The courtroom held its breath. For a long moment, it seemed the judge might order Callahan removed. The bailiff even took a step forward. But something, perhaps the conviction in the SEAL's eyes, perhaps the murmurs of approval rising from the gallery, made the judge hesitate. He sat back, his jaw tight. Fine, he muttered. You may continue. The words sent a ripple through the room. Daniels exhaled shakily, realizing he had been holding his breath. Callahan gave the faintest nod of acknowledgement before turning his gaze back toward the bench. He wasn't finished, not by a long shot. And for the first time since the trial had begun, hope flickered in the air like a fragile flame refusing to die. Lieutenant Mark Callahan stood like a statue at the center of the courtroom, his gaze steady on the judge, his jaw tight. He hadn't come for theatrics. His voice, his presence, his record, those were more powerful than any polished speech the prosecutor could craft. But still, this was no battlefield. This was a courtroom. And here, words were the weapons. The judge exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing as though he could wear Callahan down with silence. The room, however, was already his. Every face in the gallery leaned forward, hungry for each word. Officer Daniels sat frozen beside Rex, his hand still wrapped tightly in the dog's fur. Daniels' heart hammered as if he were standing trial himself. For weeks he had pleaded, begged, and failed. But this man, this stranger, was turning the tide with nothing more than conviction. Callahan cleared his throat, his voice carrying easily through the tense silence. Your Honor, I'm not here to disrupt your authority. I respect the court, just as I respect the laws that govern it. But sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. Sometimes justice requires us to see beyond what's written. On paper, the judge raised a brow but didn't interrupt. I served 4 tours overseas, Callahan continued. And in every one of those tours, I fought alongside canines like Rex. To call them animals is to strip them of what they've proven on the battlefield. They are trained soldiers. They are loyal beyond comprehension. And when the moment comes, they will put themselves in harm's way without hesitation to protect us, to protect our country, to protect lives. He paused, scanning the gallery. I have buried men. I have carried caskets draped in flags. And I have also stood at funerals where the casket was smaller, draped in the same flag, because it carried a K9. We gave them honors because they earned them. And yet here I stand, watching a court condemn one like a criminal. Gasps echoed faintly through the room. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Even a few officers, hardened men used to violence and tragedy, lowered their gazes, their throats tight. The prosecutor shot up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. His tone was sharp, almost desperate. Your Honor, this is irrelevant grandstanding. The lieutenant's military experience, while admirable, has no bearing on what happened. Here, This isn't Afghanistan. This is a civilian neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, this dog attacked a man and left him bleeding. Facts, not feelings, must guide this court. The judge gave a slow nod, silently acknowledging the point. Callahan didn't flinch. He had expected resistance. Facts, Callahan repeated, turning toward the prosecutor, his voice edged. With steel. The fact is, that man had a knife. The fact is, officers could have been killed. The fact is, Rex neutralized the threat without ending a life. And the biggest fact of all? Everyone walked away alive that night because of him, including the man who brought this case. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. That doesn't change the fact that Rex used excessive force. Excessive force. Callahan cut him off, his tone rising just enough to send a shiver through the room. I've seen excessive force. I've seen bullets tear through bodies. I've seen bombs leave nothing but ash. If you think controlled restraint that disarms a suspect without ending his life is excessive force, then you've never seen what real force looks like. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor's face flushed. Your Honor, sit down, the judge ordered curtly. His gaze had shifted, ever so slightly, toward Callahan. Not with warmth, not with approval, but with something far more dangerous for the prosecution. Interest. Callahan took a slow step closer to the bench, lowering his voice, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. Your Honor, I brought more than words. He opened the folder on the evidence table and slid a series of documents forward. These are declassified mission logs. They document instances where K-9 South saved entire platoons, where they earned official commendations. Some even outrank enlisted men. They are recognized by the military chain of command. That is the law, military law. If the United States government can acknowledge them as soldiers overseas, how can this court reduce Rex to nothing more than property here at home? The judge's hand froze on his gavel. For the first time, he didn't look stern. He looked conflicted. Daniel's chest swelled with a flicker of hope. His eyes burned as he looked at Callahan, silently thanking him with everything he had. But Callahan wasn't finished. He stepped toward Rex, kneeling down until he was eye level with the dog. Rex's ears perked, tail wagging faintly. Callahan placed a hand gently on the shepherd's neck, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. This dog doesn't understand trials or verdicts. He doesn't know politics or public opinion. All he knows is loyalty. He knows that when his handler gives a command, he obeys. When danger rises, he confronts it. And when lives are at stake, he protects them. That's not instinct. That's sacrifice. That's duty. The silence was unbearable. Every breath, every rustle of fabric seemed too loud in the stillness. Finally, Callahan rose, his gaze sweeping the room one last time before locking back on the judge. Rex is not guilty of wrongdoing. He is guilty only of doing his job. And if this court cannot see the difference, then it is not Rex who has failed. It is us. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, as if on cue, the gallery erupted not with shouts, but with applause. People clapped softly at first, hesitant, as though afraid they'd be reprimanded. But soon the sound swelled, louder and louder, until it filled the chamber. Even officers who had sat stony-faced throughout the trial were clapping, some with tears streaking their cheeks. The judge struck his gavel furiously. Order! Order in this court! The applause died, but the energy didn't fade. The judge's face was flushed, his eyes flickering with something close to anger, but not at Callahan, at himself, at the impossible bind of law and justice colliding before him. Daniels leaned closer to Rex, his voice trembling with renewed hope. Hold on, buddy. Just hold on. We might have a chance. Callahan stepped back, folding his arms behind his back in military precision. He had said his piece. Now the weight of it sat heavy in the room, waiting to tip the scales. And though the judge hadn't spoken yet, though his gavel still rested in his hand, everyone in that room knew one thing with certainty. The trial was no longer the same. The tension inside the courtroom was unbearable. The Navy SEAL, Lieutenant Mark Callahan, stood tall in his crisp uniform, every medal and insignia glinting under the harsh overhead lights. His presence seemed to command not just the attention of those in the room, but the very air itself. The murmurs and whispers had died down, leaving a silence that felt electric, like a storm waiting to break. Mark's eyes scanned the faces before him, jurors leaning forward, reporters gripping their pens, a community divided between fear and reverence. At the center of it all was Rex, the canine whose life now hung in balance. Chained, ears pulled back, the dog looked less like a dangerous beast and more like a loyal soldier awaiting judgment. Officer Daniels knelt by his side, one hand clenched on the collar, the other wiping away a tear he could no longer contain. Mark cleared his throat, his voice resonant and calm. "Your Honor, before this court passes sentence on that dog, you must first understand what he represents. Rex is not just an animal. He is a warrior." The words struck like an arrow. People shifted in their seats, listening closer. The judge, who had worn a mask of indifference, tilted his head ever so slightly. Mark began to recount his own experiences, scenes not found in any legal brief or police report. He spoke of dusty roads in Afghanistan, where soldiers moved cautiously, every step a gamble. "We relied on dogs like Rex," he said, his tone unwavering. "When our eyes failed, they saw. When our instincts faltered, theirs carried us through. And when death was inches away, they leapt forward without hesitation." His words painted vivid pictures. A village road littered with hidden explosives. A night raid where silence was broken only by the growl of a canine who had sensed the unseen. Soldiers who made it home only because a dog had gone forward instead of them. The courtroom sat spellbound. Even the hard-bitten reporters who had come prepared to write a scandal found their pens resting on paper, unmoving, their attention fully consumed by the SEAL's testimony. Mark's voice cracked slightly when he spoke of his fallen partner. Her name was Shadow, a German shepherd. She was assigned to me during a deployment. We trained together, ate together, even slept side by side when nights grew too cold. She wasn't just my dog. She was my family. His hand clenched as though reliving the moment. When the blast came, she took it all. She didn't hesitate. And because of that, I'm standing here today. Gasps and sniffles rippled through the room. Daniels lowered his head, squeezing Rex closer, knowing too well the truth of those words. The judge, who until then had seemed immune to sentiment, shifted in his chair. He leaned forward, chin resting on steepled fingers. He wanted to object, to remind the courtroom that this was not a hearing about war stories, but about a single incident on U.S. soil. Yet even he could not deny the gravity in the SEAL's tone. Mark pressed on. "We pin medals on soldiers, call them heroes, and build statues in their memory. But when it comes to these dogs, we call them property. We discard them when they are wounded. And now, in this courtroom, we condemn them when they do what we train them to do, protect." A murmur of agreement stirred in the gallery. Some nodded, others wiped their eyes. The prosecutor tried to interject, rising quickly. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation." But Mark's gaze snapped to him with the force of a battlefield. "Commander, no, sir. This is truth." His voice thundered across the chamber. "You speak of law, but what of justice? You speak of order, but what of sacrifice? Tell me, Counselor, how many lives have you carried on your back in the dead of night? How many times have you stood in the path of death and watched a dog shield you from it? The prosecutor faltered, his face reddening. He sank back into his seat, fumbling with his papers. Mark turned back to the jury. Rex is no different from Shadow. No different from the countless canines south who have walked into hell with us and never walked back out. To call him dangerous is to ignore the truth that he is brave. To condemn him is to betray the very ideals this country claims to hold dear. The courtroom was heavy with silence. Then, unexpectedly, a woman in the gallery stood. Her voice was shaky, but loud enough to carry. "Rex saved my daughter," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She was in the park that night. The man with the knife, he was going for her. If Rex hadn't acted, my little girl wouldn't be here." The words cut deeper than any legal argument. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some crying openly. The judge's gavel slammed for order, but even he seemed rattled. His mask of authority was slipping. Mark let the silence return before delivering his final blow. He reached into his pocket and placed something small and worn on the evidence table. It was Shadow's military dog tag, scratched and bent from shrapnel. "This belonged to my partner," he said softly. "She gave her life for this country. And if she were alive today, I would be standing here for her, just as I stand here for Rex." He stepped back, saluted, and let his hand fall to his side. His testimony was finished, but its echoes would linger long after. The judge sat frozen, gavel in hand, but unable to strike. His face betrayed conflict, duty against conscience, law against humanity. The gallery had been transformed. Where once doubt and suspicion had lingered, now there was unity, an understanding that the dog at the center of it all was not just an accused, but a symbol of something greater. Officer Daniels clutched Rex, whispering, "Hold on, boy. Just hold on." For the first time, he felt hope rise inside him. Hope that the truth was finally being heard. The prosecutor scrambled for words, but none came. The jurors' faces had softened, their notes forgotten. And deep inside, even the judge seemed to feel the weight of history pressing down on his gavel. The seal had not just defended a dog. He had reminded everyone in that courtroom what honor truly meant. The trial was no longer about an attack. It was about justice, sacrifice, and whether a nation was willing to stand by the very protectors who had always stood by it. And as Mark Callahan took his seat, the courtroom knew one thing with certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after Lieutenant Mark Callahan's testimony was deafening. The weight of his words still lingered in the courtroom air, like smoke that refused to clear. For a moment, everyone, judge, jury, and gallery alike, was caught between awe and sorrow. Rex sat quietly, his head resting against Officer Daniels' knee, as though he too understood the shift in the atmosphere. But silence is a dangerous ally in court, and the prosecutor, Nathan Kessler, knew it. Kessler rose sharply from his chair, his suit creasing with the sudden movement. His eyes burned with determination, but there was something else to frustration, perhaps even desperation. He adjusted his tie, shuffled his notes, and cleared his throat with the exaggerated confidence of a man trying to wrest control back from a room that no longer favored him. "Your Honor," Kessler began, his tone clipped and precise. "With all due respect to Lieutenant Callahan's service and sacrifice, this is not a war tribunal. This is a civilian court, tasked with upholding the law of this land. And the law, as it stands, is clear. A K9, no matter how decorated, remains an animal. And when that animal inflicts harm, it must be held accountable." A low rumble of disapproval rolled through the gallery. Someone whispered, "Shame," but Kessler pressed on, gripping the lectern as though it were a weapon. "Let us not lose ourselves in sentimentality," he snapped. "Yes, Rex may have saved lives abroad. Yes, these animals may have served bravely. But none of that changes the fact that on U.S. soil, in a public park, this dog attacked a civilian unprovoked. By all initial accounts. Are we to excuse that simply because he once wore a vest marked K9? Should we allow our streets to become battlegrounds where trained attack dogs roam free? He turned dramatically toward the jury, his eyes locking on them one by one. Ladies and gentlemen, this trial is not about war stories. It is about public safety. It is about whether we, as a society, will let emotion cloud our judgment. If we set precedent here today, if we excuse this dog's attack, we open the OC. Door for chaos. Next time, it may not be a man with a knife. It may be a child playing too close, a passerby jogging down the street. Will we tell their families, sorry, but that dog was once a hero, so his violence is permissible? A hush fell over the courtroom. The prosecutor's words, though harsh, carried logic that pricked at the edges of doubt. Several jurors leaned back, conflicted. The judge's expression tightened again into neutrality, as though retreating from the emotion of Mark's testimony back into the safety of legal boundaries. Mark Callahan did not flinch. He sat calmly, arms crossed, studying the prosecutor. With the same unshakable composure he might give an enemy across a battlefield. Kessler sensed weakness in the silence and pressed harder. Your Honor, let the record show that Lieutenant Callahan admitted to training animals like Rex for war zones. War zones, not public parks. These dogs are bred and conditioned for aggression, for attack. They are tools of violence, designed for one purpose, to subdue and to kill. Ask yourselves, is such a creature fit for integration into our communities? Or does keeping them among us place innocent civilians at risk? The words landed with force, but then Kessler did something unexpected. He reached for a folder on his desk, thick, sealed, and stamped with a red marker that made the gallery stir with curiosity. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to submit into evidence excerpts from classified mission logs declassified. This morning, his smirk grew as he pulled papers free. Documents that show, in black and white, what these so-called heroes are capable of when unleashed. Mark's jaw tightened. Daniels looked up sharply. The gallery shifted, whispering. The judge frowned, signaling Kessler to proceed. The prosecutor flipped the page and read aloud. Operation Iron Gate, Kandahar Province. K9 designated Shadow engaged insurgent at close range. Fatality confirmed. He paused for dramatic effect. Operation Red Sand. K9 engaged 2 individuals suspected of laying IEDs. Both sustained fatal injuries before identification. Could be verified. Gasps echoed through the room. Kessler snapped the folder shut and looked directly at the jury. There you have it. These dogs were not rescuers. They were executioners. We cannot pretend that what happened overseas was simply defense. These animals are weapons, plain and simple. And Rex, sitting right there, is one of them. The gallery erupted in protest, some crying out in anger, others in disbelief. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! Order in the court. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted again. Where Mark had raised Rex to the status of a soldier, Kessler had dragged him back down to that of a weapon, dangerous and uncontrollable. Daniels tightened his grip on Rex's collar. Don't you listen to him, boy? He whispered, his voice cracking. But his eyes betrayed worry. Mark rose slowly, as though pulled by a gravity only he could feel. Your Honor, permission. To respond, the judge hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Mark walked to the center of the courtroom, his boots echoing against the polished floor. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the prosecutor. He looked only at Rex, whose brown eyes followed him with quiet trust. Those mission logs. Mark began, his voice steady. Tell half a story? Yes, Shadow engaged insurgents. Yes, she acted with force. But what those words fail to capture is context. He turned toward the jury now, his gaze unwavering. The insurgent in Kandahar was armed, moving toward a group of children with an explosive vest. Shadow stopped him. The two men in operation. Red Sand? They were caught placing IEDs on a route used by our medics. Without her intervention, 20 lives would have been lost that night. He stepped closer, holding the jury with his words. You can strip away context. You can reduce sacrifice to a line of ink on a page. But that does not change the truth. These dogs saved lives. And Rex is no different. That night in the park, the man he subdued was armed with a knife. Witnesses already confirmed this. Rex didn't act out of aggression. He acted out of protection. Kessler leapt up. Objection, he's turning this into a morality play. The judge hesitated, then shook his head. Overruled. Let him finish. Mark's voice grew firmer. You call Rex a weapon. I call him a shield. You say he is dangerous. I say he is disciplined. You read lines from a report, but I lived them. I carried Shadow's broken body from the dirt with my own hands. And I will not stand here and let you call her or Rex a killer without reminding this court what they truly are. Guardians. The gallery erupted in applause, despite the judge's frantic gavel. Kessler, red-faced, tried one last push. Even if what the lieutenant says is true, none of it changes the fact that Rex attacked a man without a direct command. That alone proves he is unpredictable, a danger. Mark turned to him, calm as stone. Or it proves that when the command failed, instinct prevailed, and that instinct was to protect human life. He paused, then delivered the final strike. Tell me, Counselor, how many lives has Rex taken here at home? None. How many has he saved? At least one that very night. So I ask you, who's the real danger? The dog that stopped a man with a knife, or the man with the knife? The words hung heavy in the air. The prosecutor faltered, his voice lost. And for the first time since the trial began, the jury leaned unmistakably toward the defense. The heavy silence of the courtroom weighed on every chest, suffocating the air itself. The words of Lieutenant Callahan still echoed like distant thunder, their weight impossible to ignore. Yet despite the SEAL's powerful testimony, the prosecutor clung to his stance. A decorated soldier's stories, he had sneered, are not evidence. The fact remains, this animal attacked a man. The law cannot bend to emotions. The gallery murmured with discontent, their frustration rippling through the rows like a wave crashing against the shore. Rex sat quietly at Officer Daniel's side, his amber eyes wide and searching, unaware of the storm surrounding him. His chest rose and fell steadily, the calmness of a warrior waiting for orders. Daniel stroked his neck, whispering words only the dog could hear. Hold on, buddy. Don't give up on me now. The judge leaned forward, his eyes darting between the prosecutor and Callahan. His gavel hovered over the desk, but he did not strike. Something in the SEAL's words had unsettled him, something beyond the courtroom walls, something buried deep in his conscience. Then, something entirely unexpected broke the suffocating tension. From the side bench, the man Rex had stopped that fateful night slowly rose to his feet. Shackles clinked softly around his wrists, a metallic sound slicing through the silence like a blade. Heads turned sharply toward him. Even the prosecutor looked startled, unsure of what was about to unfold. The suspect's face was pale, his eyes swollen from sleepless nights and guilt that seemed to seep from his very pores. For weeks, he had sat hunched in silence, letting lawyers argue over his actions while hiding behind the mask of a criminal. But now, as Rex's fate hung in the balance, his trembling lips parted. Your Honor? His voice cracked, barely above a whisper, but strong enough to stop the entire room cold. The judge's eyes narrowed. "You will remain silent until spoken to," he ordered firmly. But the man shook his head, defiant for the first time since his arrest. "No, you need to hear this. All of you do." His voice grew stronger, fueled by something no one expected: remorse. Daniel's hand froze mid-pat against Rex's fur. Callahan's jaw tightened as he turned to face the man he once might have seen as nothing more than an enemy. Even the jury leaned forward, caught between disbelief and curiosity. The man's shackled hands trembled as he pointed toward Rex. "That dog didn't attack me. He saved me." Gasps erupted across the courtroom. The prosecutor immediately objected, slamming his papers down. "This is outrageous. Irrelevant testimony from a convicted criminal cannot—" "Silence," the judge snapped, raising his hand. For once, even the prosecutor backed down, startled by the weight in the judge's tone. The room was his again, and he wanted to hear more. The man swallowed hard, his voice raw with honesty. "That night, I was armed. I was ready to hurt someone, anyone. My mind wasn't right. I didn't care if it was an officer, a civilian, or a kid walking by. But then, he came." His gaze shifted to Rex, whose ears perked at the familiar tone of a voice he had once faced down. Rex didn't growl. He didn't lunge. He simply stared back with the calm steadiness of a soldier who knew the truth. The man's voice cracked as tears welled in his eyes. "When Rex stopped me, I thought I was done for. But looking into his eyes, I realized something. He wasn't trying to kill me. He was stopping me from killing someone else. He saved lives that night. He even saved me from myself." For the first time in days, Daniels let out a shuddering breath, his chest rising as though a weight had been lifted. Callahan's shoulders, always square and rigid, loosened slightly. The gallery murmured louder now, the tide of public opinion swelling with every word the man spoke. "I came here today ready to face punishment for what I did," the man continued, his voice trembling with sincerity. "But if you put that dog down, you're punishing the wrong one. He's not the monster I was." The confession cut deep. People who moments ago viewed the man as irredeemable now saw the human underneath the broken figure, who had been pulled back from the edge by a four-legged soldier. The prosecutor tried again, but his words fell flat. "Your Honor, this is a ploy for sympathy. He's manipulating this courtroom." The judge raised a hand again, silencing him instantly. His eyes were locked on the trembling man before him. "Sit down," the judge finally commanded, his tone softer this time, almost contemplative. The man obeyed, lowering himself back into his seat, his head bowed in shame. But the damage, or perhaps the healing, had been done. His confession rippled through the chamber like a tidal wave, changing everything it touched. Daniels squeezed Rex gently, whispering through a trembling smile, "They finally know the truth, boy." The gallery erupted into quiet murmurs of hope. Strangers wiped tears from their eyes. Mothers clutched their children tighter, realizing the dog they had once feared had actually protected them. Even some of the jurors exchanged glances, their rigid neutrality cracking beneath the weight of human truth. Callahan stepped forward, his voice steady. "Your Honor, what more evidence do we need? The man himself admits Rex saved lives. If this court condemns him now, it isn't justice. It's betrayal of every K-9 who ever served, every soldier who ever trusted them, and every life they've ever saved." The judge sat motionless, his fingers drumming lightly against the bench. His eyes darted toward Rex, and back to Callahan, and finally to Daniels. For the first time, there was something in his face no one had seen before: doubt. Real, visible doubt. Silence fell again, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of before. This was different. This was the silence of anticipation, of hope flickering like a fragile flame in the darkness. Then slowly, the judge removed his glasses and set them down. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but carried across the room with the authority of a man standing at the edge of a turning point. This testimony cannot be ignored. A wave of relief washed over Daniels. Callahan allowed himself the faintest nod of approval. Rex wagged his tail once, as though sensing the tide had shifted. But the judge wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing on the prosecutor. If the man Rex subdued confesses that the dog saved lives, then this court must reconsider the very foundation of this case. Perhaps this trial has not been about law at all. Perhaps it has been about whether we choose to see loyalty as violence and protection as danger. The prosecutor sat frozen, his face pale. His arguments, once sharp as blades, now seemed brittle, like glass ready to shatter. The gallery broke into applause before the bailiff restored order, but it was too late. The courtroom had already changed. The narrative had shifted completely. Daniels pressed his forehead against Rex's, whispering through tears, "We're going to make it, buddy. We're going to walk out of here together." For the first time in weeks, hope wasn't just a whisper in Daniels' heart. It was alive. It was real. And though the trial was not yet over, everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. The tide had turned. The K-9 was no longer on trial. The system was. The courtroom held its collective breath. Every eye was fixed on the judge, whose gavel rested silently on the desk, a symbol of authority, now tinged with uncertainty. Lieutenant Mark Callahan stood resolute, but even he sensed the gravity of a moment. Across from him, Officer Daniels stroked Rex's neck, whispering soothing words that only the dog could understand. Rex, alert and obedient, wagged his tail slightly, as though he knew that something monumental was about to unfold. The judge rubbed his forehead, jaw tight, lost in the conflict between law and justice. His mind replayed every argument, every testimony, every piece of evidence, and every soul-bearing word spoken by the man who had been subdued by Rex. This was no longer a simple case about a dog attacking a man. It had become a trial about morality, duty, and the human capacity for understanding courage in all forms. Nathan Kessler, the prosecutor, sat rigid in his seat, his hands clenching the edge of the lectern. His arguments had been strong at the start, built on technicality and law, but now they felt hollow in the face of truth. The gallery's murmurs, the confessions, the SEAL's testimony, they had shifted the room into a new reality. And for Kessler, it was a reality he could not control. "Your Honor," Callahan said, his voice calm yet commanding, "I understand that the law is a guiding principle, but laws are written by humans, and humans are capable of mistakes. To condemn Rex now is to ignore the truth that has been laid bare for all to see." The judge's eyes softened as he met Callahan's gaze. He could see the unwavering conviction, the military discipline, the honesty that carried across every word. And he could also see the bond between man and dog, a connection forged through trust, loyalty, and life-threatening circumstances. The prosecutor interjected sharply, "Your Honor, this court must operate within the boundaries of the law. Sentiment and stories of heroism cannot override facts. Rex did engage a human being. That alone." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Kessler, I understand your position, but I am reminded that law without justice is meaningless. I have heard testimony, confessions, and first-hand accounts that paint a very different picture than the one initially presented. This is not a simple matter of technicality anymore." Callahan's expression remained neutral, but inside he felt a flicker of hope. He had fought on battlefields where seconds determined life or death, where hesitation could cost lives. And now, in this small courtroom, he had fought for Rex's life with the same intensity. Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at the jury. Their faces were tense, some nodding subtly in agreement, others overwhelmed by the weight of everything they had witnessed. This was no longer just about Rex. It was about recognizing the courage and sacrifice of those who protect, human and canine alike. From the gallery, a quiet voice broke through the tension. It was the mother of the little girl saved by Rex. "Please," she said softly, her hands clasped tightly. "Please don't let him go. He saved my daughter. He saved lives. He deserves to live." The judge's gaze swept the courtroom again. He saw tears, gratitude, relief, and the undeniable truth of the child's life preserved by the dog sitting quietly at Daniel's side. His mind raced, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a physical force. This was not a decision he could make lightly, nor one that would ever leave him without reflection. He tapped the gavel lightly, summoning order. This court must consider all factors. The testimony has been extensive, the evidence overwhelming, and the confessions undeniable. Yet I must weigh them against the laws of this state and the precedents established over decades. The judge closed his eyes briefly, breathing deeply. Memories of his own dog from childhood flashed in his mind, loyal companion who had never done harm, yet had given unconditional trust. He thought of the officers he had known, the stories of K-9 units in his own state, and the countless times these animals had acted in the defense of human life. Finally, he opened his eyes. The weight of the moment was clear in his expression. He looked first at Rex, then at Daniels, then at Callahan. "I must make a ruling based on what has been presented, and I must acknowledge that what is presented here goes beyond simple law." Kessler stood abruptly, ready to argue one last time. "Your Honor, I must insist." "Sit down," the judge said firmly, cutting him off. "This is my decision." The room held its breath. The judge leaned forward, resting both elbows on the bench. "This court has heard testimony from a decorated Navy SEAL, eyewitness accounts, and the confession of the man who was attacked. This court has considered whether Rex acted with intent to harm or with a sense of duty to protect. Life." He paused, letting his words settle over the courtroom like a thick fog. Every heart beat faster, every eye widened. Even the judge's own gavel seemed to tremble on the desk before him. "After careful consideration," he continued, "it is the determination of this court that Rex, the K-9 in question, acted in defense of human life and in accordance with his training as a protection and service animal. His actions were not malicious, excessive, or unwarranted. Rather, they exemplified discipline, courage, and loyalty beyond what most humans demonstrate." A stunned silence filled the room. Daniels held his breath, gripping Rex tightly. Rex tilted his head slightly, ears perked, sensing the change. In tone, the judge's gaze softened. "Therefore, this court rules that Rex shall not be euthanized. Furthermore, Rex shall remain in the care of Officer Daniels, under all necessary supervision and training protocols. The court also recognizes Rex's role in preventing further harm and acknowledges his service in the protection of human life." The silence broke like a dam. Cheers erupted from the gallery. People clapped, some weeping openly, others hugging. Strangers beside them. Daniels hugged Rex close, burying his face in the dog's fur. "We did it, boy, we did it." Mark Callahan allowed himself the smallest smile, feeling a weight lift that he hadn't realized he carried. He knew the courtroom hadn't just saved Rex. It had honored the very concept of protection and loyalty that defined every canine who had ever served. The judge looked around the room, finally speaking to everyone present. "Let this ruling serve as a reminder. Courage and sacrifice may come in forms we do not always expect. Sometimes Justice requires us to look beyond the obvious, to see the hero beneath the fur, the soldier beneath the collar. Kessler sat in stunned silence, defeated but unable to argue further. The gallery continued to cheer, some people wiping tears from their eyes, some taking photos, others kneeling to hug their children. The courtroom, once tense and divided, was now unified in a single, unspoken acknowledgement. Rex was a hero. Daniels stood, holding Rex's leash carefully as he approached Callahan. "I can't thank you enough," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You saved his life, and mine too." Callahan shook his head. "You didn't need me to tell you the truth. You just needed someone to stand beside you while the world saw it too. Rex did all the heavy lifting." Rex barked softly, tail wagging. Daniels laughed through tears. "Yeah, you did, buddy. Yeah, you did." Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and the world seemed to pause for just a moment, recognizing the courage of one dog who had defied judgment and the humans who had fought tirelessly for him. And for a brief, shining moment, everyone, judge, jury, officers, SEAL, and citizen understood what it truly meant to serve and protect. As Daniels walked Rex out of the courtroom, people cheered, children waved, and even the sun seemed brighter. That day, it was more than a victory. It was a declaration that loyalty, courage, and sacrifice, no matter the form, would always be honored. Rex trotted beside Daniels, calm yet proud, fully aware of the weight lifted from his shoulders. And as the doors of the courthouse swung closed behind them, a sense of peace settled over the city. The battle had been fought, and just as true, unwavering justice had won. The story would be told for years to come. The day a Navy SEAL stepped into a courtroom, a canine's life hung in balance, and humanity was reminded that heroes come in all shapes, sizes, and species. The courthouse steps were alive with cheers and camera flashes. Reporters scrambled for every angle, capturing the moment that would become a story remembered nationwide. The day a canine's life was spared, and the truth of loyalty and courage triumphed. Officer Daniels held Rex close, the leash loosely draped over his wrist, as the dog barked, once soft, confident, and full of pride. The world outside the courtroom was brighter somehow, as though the sun itself had joined in the celebration. Crowds gathered spontaneously, strangers offering congratulations, and even some children waved small flags they had brought along, sensing they were witnessing something heroic. Daniels turned to Mark Callahan, the SEAL who had changed everything with nothing more than his words, testimony, and undeniable authority. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just save. Rex, you saved me from losing faith." Callahan shook his head, his expression humble. "You didn't need me to prove anything. You did all the work by staying by his side, by believing in him when no one else did. I just made sure the courtroom saw it too." Rex, sensing the energy and relief around him, trotted between the two men, tail wagging furiously, his tongue lolling happily. Children nearby pointed, eyes wide with wonder. "Look, a hero dog," one exclaimed. Others clapped, and the murmurs of admiration grew louder. The news crews pressed forward, cameras capturing every angle. Questions were shouted over the crowd, but Daniels held up a hand, requesting just a moment of quiet. He knelt beside Rex, resting his forehead against the dog's soft fur. "We made it, buddy," he whispered. "You're safe now, forever." The bond between them was palpable, unbroken by the chaos, legal battles, and the fear of losing one another. Rex nuzzled Daniel's hand, leaning into him like a child seeking reassurance. He had faced judgment, but he had faced it with the unflinching loyalty and courage that defined every fiber of his being. Callahan watched them, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "You know," he said quietly, This isn't just a victory for Rex. It's a victory for every K9 who has ever served, every soldier who has relied on them, and for every person who has ever needed them. This proves that even when the world doubts, courage and loyalty can't be ignored. Daniels nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. He's more than a dog. He's family. And now the world finally knows it too. The crowd continued to cheer as the trio began to move toward the courthouse exit. News reporters jostled for position, microphones thrust forward. One reporter asked, "Officer Daniels, what's next for Rex?" Daniels smiled warmly, looking down at Rex. "Rex's job isn't over. He's going to continue protecting and serving with me. But for now, he gets what every hero deserves: a little peace, a little rest, and a lot of love." Rex barked, again, tail wagging, as though confirming his agreement. The sound was infectious, and the crowd erupted once more. It wasn't just a dog being celebrated. It was the embodiment of bravery, and the reminder that loyalty could not be measured by law alone. Meanwhile, in the back of the crowd, the man Rex had subdued during the fateful park incident watched quietly. Tears streaked his face. He had expected anger, perhaps even hatred from the public, but instead he found understanding, even forgiveness. His eyes met Rex's for the first time, and a silent acknowledgement passed between them. The dog had saved more than one life that night, not just the lives of others, but perhaps his own. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the courthouse, Daniels and Rex approached a small park nearby. Children played, dogs ran freely, and the world seemed at ease for the first time in weeks. Rex paused for a moment, sniffing the air, then bolted toward a group of children chasing a ball. Daniels laughed, jogging after him, and the sound was pure, unburdened joy. Callahan lingered on the steps, watching the scene unfold. For a soldier, moments like these were rare. The calm after chaos, the victory that couldn't be measured in medals or reports. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing he had done his part, that justice had been served in the truest sense of the word. Back at the courthouse, the judge sat alone in his chambers, reflecting on the day's events. The gavel still rested on his desk, yet it felt weightless now, a symbol of law balanced by conscience. He thought of Rex, of Callahan, and of Officer Daniels. He realized that justice wasn't always about rules or statutes. It was about understanding, courage, and the ability to see truth where others saw only fear. The courtroom would go down in history, not for a controversial case or a dramatic arrest, but for the decision to honor loyalty, to recognize bravery, and to protect a life that had protected so many others. Rex had become more than a K9. He had become a symbol, a reminder that even in a world dominated by human error and law, courage and fidelity could still prevail. As night fell, Daniels and Rex returned home, greeted by the quiet comfort of familiarity. Rex trotted inside, sniffing every corner of his safe haven, then settled beside Daniels, resting his head on his master's lap. The officer stroked his fur slowly, feeling the tension of the past weeks melt away. "Rest easy, buddy," Daniels whispered. "No more trials, no more fear. Just us from now on." Rex let out a low, contented sigh, his tail wagging slightly even as his eyes closed. In that moment, the bond between man and dog was unshakable, tempered by trials, strengthened by loyalty, and celebrated by those who had witnessed the truth. The story of Rex Daniels and the courtroom trial would be told for generations. News outlets across the country reported on the remarkable K9 who had faced death and survived, thanks to the courage of a SEAL and the faith of his handler. Children drew pictures of Rex in his vest. Local newspapers ran headlines celebrating his heroism, and the community rallied to ensure that all K9 units were treated with the respect and care they deserved. But beyond the headlines and accolades, the most important thing remained. Rex was alive, Daniels was proud, and their bond had been tested and proven unbreakable. Mark Callahan eventually returned to his duties, knowing that he had done more than his job. He had ensured that a life of service, dedication, and sacrifice would not be extinguished unjustly. And though he would continue to fight battles in distant lands, the memory of this courtroom victory lingered in his mind as a rare victory for justice in its purest form. And in a quiet corner of the city, a K9 and his handler rested, side by side, the sun setting on a day of triumph, understanding, and redemption. The trials had ended, the danger had passed, and the bond between man and dog had been recognized for what it truly was: sacred, unbreakable, and heroic. Rex barked softly once, as if to say, "We made it." Daniels smiled and ruffled his ears. "Yes, we did, Muddy. Yes, we did." The courthouse steps would remain silent at night, the gavel untouched. But the story of Rex and those who fought for him would echo forever, a tale of bravery, loyalty, and the undeniable truth that heroes come in every shape, size, and species. And for Rex, the world would finally be safe, understood, and filled with love, because the day a judge condemned him to death, the courage of a seal and the loyalty of a man refused to let him go.